Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Event Industry News Podcast with me, James Dixon. Wishing you all a very good morning, afternoon, and evening, whenever or wherever you tune into today's podcast from. It is literally bang, first thing on a Monday morning for me. As always, for context, we're recording this on Monday, the 15th of January. Very cold but beautiful, clear morning where I'm based, and we'll find out a little bit about what it's like where our guest is when they bring them on in just a second. And we're going to be talking for the first time this year, and hopefully, and definitely, I would think not the last time, about the subject of mental health within the events industry. This is something that we've spoken, I'm confident in saying regularly about on the podcast over the last 2 or 3 years, particularly. And I'm delighted that sort of from a maybe a slight distance, or where I sit, it's becoming a conversation that um, is a little bit freer within all industries at the moment. I'm fortunate enough to work in events over a number of different business sectors, and it's not just the events industry that's talking about mental health within its own industry. It's several other sectors that I'm fortunate enough to work in as well, and many others beside that. Let's get our guest on today. Let's find out a little bit about them first of all. So, on a very, very sort of early Monday morning, I'm delighted to say that from Clarion Events, Mr. Tom Fisher joins us from his home. Tom, very good morning to you.
Good morning to you.
And as I said, we're both a little bit bleary. It's literally we're out of the traps on a Monday morning, tipping coffee down our necks, and we're up and on it. So, I guess if there's ever a time to talk about mental health in the events industry, first thing on a Monday morning is as good a time as any.
I think today's actually known as Blue Monday. I could be mistaken. I think today's meant to be the most depressing day of the year. So yeah,
Do you know what
perfect
it is?
timing, really.
It's that mid Monday in January, isn't it? Yeah,
Yeah.
I'd totally forgotten about that. But of course, it gets a lot of media coverage. The media love to remind us about stuff like this.
Oh yeah.
They absolutely love it. Tom, before we get into into the chat today, always good for the sake of our listeners to get a bit of background on our guest, who they are, what they do. What's your career pathway been so far? You know, a lot of people come into the events industry with a very, very sort of clear idea and ambition that they want to be in that industry. Others, like me, fall into it almost by accident, and 13 years down the line find themselves almost, feeling a little bit like they're imposter syndrome, that they fall into it by accident. Do they really work in there? What's your own journey been like?
Yeah, I think the AEO are actually trying to do something around that, around stopping the falling into, which we all sort of tend to reference, and actually trying to promote to people this is a place to go. If you want to travel, meet new people every day, stuff like that. So I think they're actually trying to change the narrative on that. So good on them for that.
Hmm.
Um, I've got a bit of a colourful background when it comes to employment. I've worked in a prison. That's not peeling spuds, as in, actually worked in
Yeah.
the prison. I was a police officer for 4 years, and then I left there and joined a trade association to do admin. And after about 2 weeks, the head of marketing there said, "Look, do you fancy staying?" And I went, "Yeah, definitely." Stayed there for about 2 years, and then for one reason or another, saw a job opportunity at Clarion 8 years ago coming up, and joined there as a marketing executive. And now I work in a sort of middle management position, head of sector marketing operations. What does that mean? Marketing operations is essentially the sort of ensuring that the marketing to sales transition is happening smoothly, that all leads are being processed correctly, automation of tasks that can be automated, freeing up the other marketers to do more productive work, if you like.
Hmm.
So that's where I currently sit. I sit on one of Clarion's largest portfolios, and yeah, enjoying what I'm doing at the minute.
And it can sometimes feel difficult. Certainly, when I first started to have these conversations on the podcast, it took me a while to actually be able to, I suppose, outright ask the question, what made somebody first talk about mental health? And I guess my own instinct and how awkward I felt initially about asking and having those conversations on this podcast is indicative, I suppose, of a wider issue that we had up until a few years ago about approaching the subject of mental health.
Yeah, if I may, the reason I started, I can exactly remember why. So just to give some background, I've had mental health. I don't know what the acceptable term is this month. It's been issues, it's been conditions, it's been X, Y, Z over the course of um, my experience of it since I was 16 years old. It started off as depression, and we'll touch back on this later, but later bipolar. And where it became something I became really just, you know what, I'm just going to start talking about it was during COVID, because, all of our jobs, anyone, because this is an events podcast, anyone that's in events was constantly worried about their job, the future of the industry that they dedicated, in some cases, decades of their life to. And all I kept seeing on LinkedIn and the news was bad news, not just us, but just everyone. So I started putting, just if I saw anything positive, I started posting it,
Mm.
and that seemed to start getting a lot of traction. And I wasn't in it for the likes, but it's just, I just thought, God, I've got to do something, because this can't be good for anyone's mental health at the minute. We're already getting it from all angles, so we don't need just to be making ourselves more miserable. And then after George Floyd was murdered, there was um, a chap that put something about being the only black face in a room, was the exact words they used on a LinkedIn post. And I messaged them and just said, look, if you want to talk, just, here's my number.
Mm.
And he did. He gave me a call, and we talked it out for about an hour and a half, and had a really deep conversation. And then we sort of pivoted, and we started talking about my experiences of mental health. Not that race and mental health are the same thing at all, but we were both people in a bit of pain. Um, and then I thought, if he's got the bravery to talk about something as complex and as something that, it will have affected him in his entire life, then I can talk about mental health. And then I put on maybe two LinkedIn posts, and the traction I got was well, I shouldn't really say insane, but was off the chart. Messages pouring in, not just likes, but just general interactions. So I just kept doing it, and then I thought, ultimately, what's the worst that's going to happen? Like, someone did warn me, um, "Oh, you're harming your future career prospects," and I was thinking, well, I'm not doing too bad at the minute, and everyone knows that, I'm a bit of a wild character, so I'm just going to keep doing it, and it's led to. I've had over 300 conversations with people now. Obviously, I anonymize it all, but I do keep a log just for my own sake, just check in on people. And yeah, that's how I decided to start talking about it, and I'm not going to stop. So that's how it happened.
And has it been dual purpose for you? Has it benefited your own mental health, and in terms of them being able to actually support others with their own mental health? This strikes me that conversations of the nature that you're having with other people are twofold.
Yeah, there's certainly an area of selfishness about it. Part of my, like, who I am, I like to help people, and I feel like it is sort of it does help me to see progress and change in people. And I'm not coming at it from the conversation from the angle of a psychiatrist or a psychologist, where they're giving them all the medical definitions, and this is why this is happening, and you need to be doing this. I'm more of the, I just listen, and I just go, yeah, yeah, I've had a touch of that as well. In most cases, I have had what these people are going through, and
Mm.
it's just, I think, for most people I speak to, it's that element of, right, someone else has been through this. Like, I'm not a freak, and I will use that word because I've heard it so many times. People just think that, oh, that this there's something wrong with me. What, there's not necessarily something wrong with you. It's part of life, and there's been mitigated. There's been factors that have happened over the last couple of years, like COVID, that have seriously disrupted the status quo, and that's going to have an effect on your mental health.
How important is it that we understand, not just as an industry but as a society, that you don't have to have had or long-term issues with mental health, that it can creep up and affect anybody at any point for any reason? Somebody who may have never stereotypically said that they'd had mental health issues before may have something that happens in their life that suddenly triggers something that is very alien and very new to them. And I suppose I think personally it's really important that we understand it doesn't just have to, it's not just people who've had long-term issues that go back to childhood. It's at any point. And B, for those people who suddenly are affected by it having never experienced it before, this is why we need to have a more open book, society about conversations like that, because they're the people that may struggle the most.
Absolutely. I forgot to caveat at the beginning. I do this on every speaking engagement I do. Anything I say is my opinion. It's not Clarion Events. It's me speaking from experience. So I just thought I'd just clear that one just before I.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Not
of
that I
course.
ever say anything derogatory about Clarion. Going back to your question, the number one cohort of suicides in England, and I believe it's the UK as well, from the last collection of statistics from ONS, were males aged between 50 and 55. So that probably ties in with your question of something creeping up on you. I know that financial factors play a huge part. So, you might have been through a divorce, which obviously very expensive. For you might have lost a job that you've had your entire life. That there could be a load of things, and that's where there's a distinction between something that I've got like bipolar. It's something I've got. It's something I'm always going to have. Um, but there's also there are these little sparks, moments in life that can completely trigger a what people have historically called a meltdown, like the things I've just described.
Hmm.
So it's important to not just for people that are long-standing sufferers of this stuff, everyone to be aware that this stuff can come and get you.
How How important is it for you professionally that your colleagues understand it and have an understanding of it? Can it affect your work?
Um, it's fascinating to me at least. With bipolar often comes ADHD, something that didn't exist 20 years ago. It did, but it just wasn't diagnosed. You were just stuck at
Hmm.
the back of the classroom and considered a nuisance.
The
That is
naughty
again
boy.
yeah,
Yeah.
that again is my personal opinion. Um, I have the ability sometimes to focus on four things at once with this ADHD, and it's a very common. The community I've spoken to, um, it's actually a powerful trait. Like someone can come over and distract me, and I'll be able to go back. My brain is just segmented. And then on the flip side, sometimes I'll find it really difficult to concentrate on one thing, and then someone will come over, and it can disrupt like 20 minutes of like what I'm doing. People are aware, like, and me as a person, I'm quite vocal about it. I don't wear it like a badge, and I'm not proud of my situation. But yeah, I think it is really important. But I equally understand that some people are very shy and very. It's particularly people that are new and relatively junior. They don't want people thinking, "Oh, that person's got something wrong with them," which is
Mm.
unfortunately the interpretation we've got at the minute in society. But if you let people that work closely with you know, look, I've got these not boundaries, but I've got these little factors, these little traits in my working day. Um, at least they know about it and they can try and work around it. It's like a personal relationship. If you let
Mm.
each other know, communication is vital, in my opinion.
We still refer to it as mental health. Will we will we ever be at a stage where it's just classified as a health issue in the same way that somebody may have, I don't know, mild form of diabetes and they might need to just watch what they eat and people are aware of it in the workplace, or somebody injures their leg because they play five-a-side football on an evening and they're just struggling physically to get around the office and people make accommodations for it. We still do treat it as very much as a separate thing.
Um, my heart would love to say yes, but my brain thinks societally and due to the governance, etc., of this country, I'm just talking about this country. I can't see it happening personally, unfortunately.
I've got a 20-year-old son who's in his third year of university. And one thing that I've noticed with him and the friends that I've got to his friends that I've got to know is that age group seems to be very much more open and honest about this subject now. Have you experienced that, A, in your personal life, and B, in your professional life, when you see younger people coming into the industry, that we're in a good place in as much as the younger generation are starting and very much more accepting of this?
Yeah, I would say, again, this is my personal opinion. The new generation of the workforce are a lot better with boundaries in general and stuff like that. Talking about, okay, so what's my workload? Okay, well, I'm not going to be able to take that on if you're gonna. And historically, the millennials. I'm 35. You'll just sort of you'll say yes and worry later and stuff like that. I find that the younger generation are a lot better at going, hold on, that's not quite right. And stuff I read online, they're a lot more proactive about salary and leave and stuff like that. And yeah, with that, I think they are better with talking about mental health. My only caveat to that is I'm not a massive fan of TikTok, and I said this on a podcast with Julia Solaris not too long ago.
Mm.
I'm such a fan of the normalization of mental health. What I'm very much against is the glamorization of mental health, and I've seen it quite happen a lot where someone will see a post on TikTok, and I will say TikTok 'cause it usually is TikTok. Um, I'd see one trait and say, "Oh, I've got that," and it can be something like bipolar. Now, just because you've seen one trait of an illness and you sort of resonate with it a little bit, that doesn't mean you have it. And I would not wish some of the stuff that I've had to go through on my worst enemy. So, I, as much as I'm happy that it's being embraced and normalized, I'm very much against this. As I say, I call it the glamorization of mental health. You don't have to have something wrong with you, or that needs to be fixed. So yeah, that's as diplomatic as I can put that sentence, really.
Is that almost social media in a nutshell, where it's not just with mental health, but people see it, and if they see it enough, there's that peer pressure it's like fashion. I know it's
Yeah.
a brutal way of saying it, but they see enough people wearing the same top or the same pair of jeans or the same style of trainers, then they think, oh right, well that's the latest trend, I need to get some of those as well.
Well, look at that prime bottled drink. People are paying 90 quid for a bottle of water or whatever it is, because Jake Paul or one of the Paul
Yeah.
brothers or Logan Paul, whatever his name is, because it was on social media. So then the pressure was on the parents because all the kids had seen it on social media. I mean, it was a fantastically executed marketing strategy, but yeah, social media has got a large part to play in all of this and a lot of societal problems, in my opinion.
No, well, again, personal opinion here, not event is your news, but I'm completely not inclined to agree. I do agree with that. I'm 43 years old, and part of me thinks, I'm fairly modern. I had kids when I was quite young. They're 20 and 17, not far off 21 and 18, so they're both virtually adults. And yeah, I do have sort of maybe somewhat of an old man syndrome when it comes to social. Oh, you're spending too much time on the computer games, and you're spending too much time on social media. No, just because you've seen that doesn't mean that you have to do it. And I was that sort of borderline generation, born in 1980, where just as I was sort of finishing A level and contemplating heading off to college and university, the internet literally just crept in. I don't remember using the internet in secondary school, which I left at 18, but I do remember using it in my first year at university. So literally that that's the sort of the period where suddenly we went from not having access it to having it. So I kind of grew up without it, but have learned to use it, that generation. And in some respects, my own kids are the first generation that have grown up sort of entirely from, you know, being small boys to having access to all of that stuff. Being able to access every bit of information known to man, and yet following people, putting their heads in microwaves, and concreting themselves into it.
Yeah.
Why do we do it to ourselves? But again, one part of me thinks, well, that's what they've grown up in, so they don't know any different. But part of me still feels that I've got to sort of police it to an extent, and
Yeah.
do my best to make sure that they don't get overly influenced by it.
No, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Um, yeah, it's as I say, there's a, I think it's a Norwegian. Before a film, I think it was Norwegian. Before a film, they played a deep fake, um, basically a warning about your digital footprint and putting your photos of your kids online and what can
Mm,
happen. And yeah, I'll try and find the link for it, but it was so scary.
yeah,
They showed what the audience's reaction to it, and it was, yeah, it's startling. Generation Alpha, who are this next generation coming, will be the first generation that literally can be filmed being born and will have be digitally recorded for the rest of their life.
that's it's bonkers, isn't it? Really, when we
Yeah,
think about it, it is absolutely bonkers. And as I said, part of me thinks they'll never know any different because that's what
no,
they're born into. In the same way that I was born into, right, everyone had a house phone and a color television in the corner, and the generation before, maybe had to go down the street to make a phone call and put 10 pence in the phone box. I came across somebody not so long ago, a friend's child, who saw a phone box. What's that? So it's a telephone box. Why? What do you do? You go there to make a phone call. Why? And actually
yeah,
trying to explain to somebody who doesn't understand what to us was so obvious and intrinsic in society, and literally when you think about it now, why? Yeah, I can understand why they're asking it. Um, Taking this back to the workplace and the events industry. Um, a lot of the times that I've had this conversation on the podcast and outside of the podcast as well at events and things that I've worked at. Um, a lot of the time, the conversation comes back to the leadership and the management within the events industry. Um, we're under huge amounts of pressure to deliver financially and from an
yeah,
experiential point of view for audiences and attendees that are coming into our events. Um, with that pressure, it's often filtered up the chain to management and leadership level who feel it more than others. What's their responsibility at the moment towards mental health? Do we need to be adopting a far better approach in our leadership roles within the events industry in terms of how they manage and filter down the level in how we deal with it?
yeah. I suppose because again, mental health is such a complicated issue, and again, there's two, well, there's thousands of strands, but there's two main strands. There's incidentals, so a divorce, money trouble, and then there's long-standing conditions such as bipolar, etc., that require certain, well, maybe not adjustments, but certain ways of treating colleagues. Um, I need to be careful what I say here, really. I would personally say that it is a CEO or a group MD or whatever the top title is, responsibility to ensure their workforce has a safe environment to operate in. Um, if and I hate to take this morbidly, but if a member of staff doesn't dial into work one day and doesn't come into work one day, that is down to the owners. That is down to the people that are in charge of them, not just their line manager, but the people that are on the senior management team, etc. I mean, we've at Clarion got a people team who are, uh, again, speaking personally, I can't speak highly enough of. Um, I don't know. I don't know the answer. That's not my profession. I'm not a consultant for mental health
Mm,
and how to integrate that into a business, but I would consider it a massive priority, especially considering we've just had 2 years of the most disruptive. I mean, I don't know in our lifetime if we're going to have ever see that much disruption again. Um, and people, I think, are still recovering from that a little bit mentally as well, forgetting the stress of I need to hit target, etc. That's been there for decades. Um,
yeah.
yeah, I think there's a huge responsibility on management of businesses in this industry and outside.
I've genuinely, I often ask sort of loaded questions on this podcast, and obviously I want our guests to answer, but I've no idea what the answer to this question is. Uh, in given that we're in January and it's, cold and flu season, winter bugs flying around, loads of people are phoning into work just to say, look, I'm really ill, I'm under the weather, I'm full of it, I can't work, I've got a headache. Da, da. They phone in, and okay, great, that person's off sick. You're allowed to do that. You phoned in sick. They might be off for a few days. They might need to self-certify. Where do we stand on mental health issues if somebody phones into work and says, I can't come in today because mentally I can't do it?
I guess it varies business to business. I'm in a very fortunate position that I will say, with a lot of people with mental health conditions, there is a certain element of self pride. If you're battling, you don't want to take a day off sick
Hmm.
because no, I'm not letting this get to me. Sometimes that can be detrimental, and you do actually need to take some time off. But I think again, just comes down to communication. If you're putting in 100%, 30 days a month, and you need that, you've got one day where, look, I ain't got it in me today. I need to take today off sick. I think if we'd be in a much better place if we can just say that instead of pretending that we've got a cold. I don't do that. I have I taken a day off sick through. I can't remember the last day I took a day off sick through mental health, but if I needed to, I would just tell my boss, look, I am not at the races today. I will get what I needed to get done, and then I
Hmm.
think I just need to just go and just chill for a bit.
Mm.
Um, I don't think that there's people that are mentally well that don't have that exact same off day,
Sure.
but just in a different I don't know, whatever that word is, different terminology.
Yeah. Having I mentioned earlier that I fell into the events industry by mistake. I mean, part of me's always been connected to it in some way, shape, or form because going back to being a teenager, I picked up a guitar when I was in my early teens. I started playing in bands. I loved the process of putting on a gig, not just the getting on stage and performing it. I love the setup of the equipment, the organization of it, the learning how everything plugs in and connects together, and you know, uh, part of me has always sort of had that buzz. But professionally, it's fair to say that I worked elsewhere and then came into the industry in my early 30s. Um, and something that caught me out, and it took me a few years to realize what was happening, is how I felt post event. When I first started to work in the industry, it would be on one big event a year, and the rest of my freelance work was done in other things. And it took me two or three cycles of this annual event to realize that I was getting up at 6 in the morning on the week of this event, on site for 6:30, working 12, 14 hour, 15-hour days beyond, non-stop, mentally and physically non-stop. You would wrap up on the Friday, say goodbye to everybody, get back on the train. I'd head back up north where I'm based in Yorkshire, and the following week would generally be quite a quiet week work wise. And I would just end up finding myself sort of sitting in tracksuit bottoms and t-shirt. Before I knew it was 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I'm like, oh, I haven't really done anything today. And I didn't know what was happening for the first 2 or 3 years. And it was only when I spoke to somebody in the industry who said, oh, it's classic post event sort of come down. You run in on empty and adrenaline for a week, and suddenly you crash down. Um, it, it, have we got better at dealing with that? Because again, this goes back to what I said earlier about people who may not have mental health issues as a lot of people would think of them, as in long-term issues. But how important is it that in the industry where we work with these peaks and troughs, that we identify that post-event we really need to give our staff the opportunity to physically recover, but also offer an element of support maybe when they experience that come down?
Yeah, I believe there's some science behind that. Hopefully, you've got some scientists on your listenership that will correct this, but I think it's either cortisol or cortisone. Your fight or flight chemical release in your brain. It's meant for it's from our evolution where you are dealing with a stressful situation, and it's designed for that adrenaline release so that you can make a split decision, and it's meant to be a couple of minutes release, and then when you think about in events, you're sometimes using that for 3 months straight, and that's I think why you get that massive dump afterwards, where like that huge lull. Um, And yeah, I think that's where that is actually from. So it's actually like there's actually a medical reason behind it.
Mm.
Um, Fortunately, with all the data and analytics, especially in my role, there isn't really a resting period after an event now. So we're straight back at it afterwards again. But yeah, certainly, I think certainly I've noticed that in my company that people have recognised that after an event, people need a couple of days just to chill. I think stuff like a couple of days annual leave and stuff like that. Maybe I don't run a business. Well, I do run a business, but I don't run
Mm.
a an events company. Um, I think that is something that could certainly be looked at. Whether you will have a spa day or you just get a day's leave to go and relax and just self contemplate.
Yeah, I come at it maybe from yeah, it is a different angle because I'm a freelancer, I'm self-employed, so I'll work for an event, and then once that event is done and dusted, then literally it's as the last truck or the last thing is loaded out, whether it's an awards event or something that's me done. Thank you very much. See you
Yeah,
next year, or see you in a few months' time. And so it's not so much a case that I go back into work then on the Monday for the same company. Uh, that next Monday I could be working on something completely different, or there might be a couple of blank days in the diary. And I've kind of come up, come up with my own ways and means that I know if I know that that's going to happen, I'll just busy myself a little bit on
yeah,
those days. Put a few bits in the diary, or even some follow up stuff that I'm literally just doing off my own back to follow up the event I was working on, to just you know keep keep the brain ticking over enough, with enough thought on that event, that it just keeps the brain satisfied that you're still connected to it in some way, without experiencing that complete cut off that I used to feel sort of 10 years ago, where I would literally just completely crash for like 2 or 3 days, and not know
yeah.
what was going on.
Yeah, I can understand that. If you've got still some attachment to that product that you're working on, at least you're still tidying stuff up, the website, statistics afterwards, or getting surveys out and stuff like. At least you've got just little things, but it's not that
Mm,
month before of just sheer pandemonium. I don't care what event you
mm.
work on. I mean, I say pandemonium in a positive sense. It's we all know what it's like. It's
Yeah,
just
I guess that kind of opens up a whole other sort of line of questioning in terms of the industry, because yourself, you're working directly for a big company, you're employed by a company who, as an employer, has a responsibility to its staff. But so much of the event industry is also built on freelance workforce, gig economy, call it what you will, people who are self-employed, who do work on contract basis or on a day-to-day basis for different clients. And I suppose that whilst a lot of this conversation today is, we've spoken about leadership and management and their responsibility to their staff, a lot of people like me don't actually have a boss to answer to. They are their own boss, and maybe therefore don't have that position where they can seek some support. And I guess that's a whole other conversation, isn't it, about people who
yeah.
are very much on their own and making sure that they've got the support within a wider network.
Yeah, I live on my own, and during COVID, I was on my own, obviously, with a lot, for like the best part of 2 years, and so I slightly resonate with what you're saying, and it just feeling completely cut off and isolated. We talked a little bit before, we're arranging all this. I think if you know that you as a person have got a little struggle or a little niggle going on, that something's not quite right, you have got a responsibility to go and get that sorted, whether it's talking to a family member, talking to a friend, or going and seeing a doctor. You have got a responsibility to yourself and to your friends and to your family, because what can start off as something really small can escalate and unfortunately can have devastating end results, as I've unfortunately experienced myself, over something that he could have got sorted, um, if we just said something. So yeah, that'd be like that. That's sort of one thing I really wanted to sort of say today, and I sort of say on everything I go on. If you feel something's wrong, the responsibility is on you to go and get help, even if you don't. And I've been there. Even if you don't want help, you just want to feel miserable, or you just want to feel just a bit no, you know what, it'll pass.
Mm.
Just go and get help.
Yeah.
Just go and do it.
Tell me a little bit, and for the benefit of people who are listening to this today, if you hop over to the eventindustrynews.com website, you'll get the video version of this, or on YouTube, and you'll see that underneath Tom's name, captioned on the screen, says Clarion Events, but then it also says Release the Trout. Talk to me a little bit about that, if you would, Tom.
Yeah, so it's people like to say about side hustles. It's not a side hustle. My sort of long term goal in life is to become a marketing consultant. And it's not even a definitive. It's I'm happy at Clarion. But I just thought, look, I've got the skills. There's clearly a demand. There's a heavy demand in the industry, so I sort of soft launched that. The name, I mean, I could explain it to you, but I just think you'd laugh. So, but I mean, it's obviously a play on Release the Kraken. My surname's Fisher, and yeah, Release the Trout. It all came out of it. Should I admit this? It all came out of a chat in a bar with someone quite senior once.
As
So I
all the
set
best conversations happen.
Yeah. So there's going to be the sort of business plan for it is I've done some work with some people already, but there's going to be a percentage that I do for free.
Mm.
So for like startup SMEs or people that are like charities, stuff like that, that's going to be the long term business plan. There'll be a percentage. I need to work out what that is. And another huge portion of it, which I need to dedicate some time to, but work has just been very busy, is going to be dedicated towards mental health. So there's going to be a mental health resource on that website, on that company profile. So there'll be all the marketing, like what we offer, etc., etc. But then there will be links to there's for example, Diversity Alliance, who I've worked with,
Sure.
um, and there's another company that Helen Cole,
Helen Moon.
yeah, Helen Moon, sorry, don't know what
Yeah.
Helen Hell's
Event well.
Helen Moon, yeah, Eventwell, um, works for, and I'm gonna link to them. We're not partners. It's just that I want to give people when I'm 35. When I was 20 and thinking I was a weirdo, I was a freak. Um, there was no one. There was nothing online. There was no one talking about it. There was no resources. I was told to go and speak to the Samaritans, which obviously sounds a bit drastic. If it's just, oh, I'm not feeling quite right, they can go on there and it'll just like if they don't already know about those two companies in particular, which could expand, they can just be diverted off to them. I don't need their business. It's like that. If that helps one person out of the several billion on the planet, then great.
Mm. I've there's something I just want to sort of mention before we wrap up today, and it goes back to what you were saying earlier about how COVID affected us, and I've kind of got my own story with that and my own opinion on what we did right and what we did wrong. I was hospitalised with COVID in March 2020 before lockdown. I was ventilated and put into a coma a week before the UK government actually announced the lockdown. So I was the first intensive care patient in my local hospital. Uh, that's sort of how early it was, and I spent 15 days asleep and a month in intensive care, and I came out from that experience and spoke about it loads at home to family, friends. I didn't hold back. I told them everything that I'd experienced. Um, and that served me brilliantly long term. I kind of came out of it unscathed physically and mentally because I came out with absolutely a mindset that I'm going to tell anybody that asks me anything, I will tell them about it. It's not taboo. I don't feel awkward talking about it. Um, and about 18 months, well, no, in fact, longer than that, probably 2 years after I came out of hospital, I, but because of the nature of the lockdown, there was no follow up. From that, I couldn't go in for a checkup. There was no mental support network available because the NHS was basically just firefighting with what was happening. And so my sort of long-term concern with COVID from a mental health point of view is that anybody who experienced that particularly or suffered issues during the pandemic, by the time everybody sort of caught up with everything, it was life was back to normal in inverted commas. Um, I'm lucky that I chose my own pathway in terms of how you know, was open and honest about it and spoke to anybody who wanted to chat about it with me. My worry is that a lot of people didn't do that. And last year I actually went to an intensive care follow-up sort of group in a local church hall. Um, and it was people who've been in a very, very similar position to me. And I left really sort of feeling a bit strange about the whole thing and feeling really, really guilty because I was sat with a group of people who were completely and utterly traumatized by it, who had survivor's guilt, who had all sorts of things, and I just think that as a period of time, yes, it affected the industry, and I know this is an event industry news podcast and all the and a sector podcast, but wider than that, I think that period of time affected people in ways that I don't think have fully manifested themselves yet, um, and could take some time still to manifest themselves. And I think that's why we need to continue conversations like this, because I think that when people eventually start realizing and we really feel the full impact of what happened coming up now 4 years ago, I think that'll place an even bigger burden on the sort of the infrastructures that we've got in place. And I just think it's so important that people like you and Helen and other people in the events industry that are doing mental health related stuff continue to sort of shout about it and have these conversations as frequently as possible, because I think that we desperately need that network in place, because I think that we'll need it more than ever in the next 2, 3, 4 years.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to end this on a morbid note, but in s- in terms of mental health and the knock-on effects of COVID, I think the real pandemic is coming. And as you say, it is going to manifest. People are going to start processing, and people are going to start having a form of PTSD over it. And I think it's going to really start to show its head. And that is why people need to get ahead of it and start talking. And this is why I'm doing what I'm doing, because I don't want that. I've already seen way too many people go, and I don't want any more. And that's sort of my mantra for the time being. But I'm really glad that you sort of spoke up and went to that follow up, and hopefully that gave you some inner peace.
Definitely, yeah, yeah. It would be, I suppose, remiss not to ask you, Tom, if people can get hold of you after this. If people are listening to this today and they want to reach out to you and have a conversation directly,
Yeah,
are they okay to track you down or LinkedIn, socials, anything like that?
yeah, of course I can. It's I think my LinkedIn's just linkedin.com/ release the trout. I think is my email address, or fish@releasethetrout.com, I guess would be, rather than give out my Clarion email address.
Hmm.
Um, and all my social media handles are the same. So yeah, it's quite easy to track me down.
No, it's been great to talk to you, Tom, and open invitation. If you want to continue this discussion, if there's anything else you want to talk about, or you think would help the wider industry, then that's what the podcast is there for. Come back on and keep the conversation going anytime you want.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic. If Adam wants to fly me out to Vegas to speak at Event Tech Live, I'd be glad to do that as well.
Absolutely. Listen, that is an intensely mentally challenging location to work in. Let me assure you, as somebody who spent 2 weeks there and is going to spend another 2 weeks there this year, it it, it is intense as a location to work in that environment for 2 weeks. I can tell you. We're about to start sort of wrapping up today. I would usually give my sort of usual spiel at the end of the podcast about going over to eventinternews.com. If you listen to this regularly, you know where to go. I think it's best to just wrap up today by saying, talk to people. Personally, I found that really, really useful in my own experiences. Tom, don't want to speak for you, but it's quite obvious that conversations help, and you've had conversations with people that have helped them and will help you as well. So let's wrap up today by saying, talk to each other, everybody. Speak to people, speak up. There's nothing wrong with speaking up and saying that you need to just talk to somebody, or release a bit of stuff that's in your head. it's a good thing to do, everybody. So stay safe, stay well, everybody, and we'll see you on the next edition of the podcast. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks very much, James. Thanks for your time.